Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Foreign Correspondent Club of Japan. This afternoon, we are going to have hopefully a very interesting and in-depth analysis of the Korean Peninsula, Korean issue, with three scholars. From my furthest right, Professor Kiyul Chung. I hope Chung, I'm sorry for the pronunciation. Then Professor Kim Young-Woong and Michel or Michel, what? Michel Chossudovsky. They are here in Japan. They attended an important seminar yesterday that was attended by hundreds of people, I believe. 300 people. Yeah. So quite a success. This is the sign once more that Korea issue is very important and very sensitive. And of course, everybody hopes that it goes further than just scholar meetings, and that even politically something is going to move in the next few months. I think that everybody saw the notice, so I don't think we need to introduce personally the three guests. It's all in the notice. I would rather go directly to the speeches so that we save time for question and answers. The first who is
Michel, Professor.
Speaking is Professor Chossudovsky. You have the microphone.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. I'd rather not hold it. Can I? Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, is that close enough now? Yeah. But I mean, I think everybody can hear me.
No, but we need to
record. Huh?
Yes.
Okay. How's that now?
Okay.
Yes. I think we understand that the world is at a very dangerous crossroads. And essentially, there are several regions of conflict in the world today. The western frontier of the Russian Federation, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and East Asia, specifically the Korean Peninsula. We also have to understand the nature as well as the consequences of nuclear war. And I'd like to spend a few minutes on US military doctrine and the shift in US military doctrine from the Cold War era. It's very important. In 2001, under a document which is called the New US Posture Review, the Nuclear Posture Review, the concept of preemptive nuclear war was launched. And this replaced the notion of so-called deterrence, which was Cold War concept. And it was understood that the use of nuclear weapons would ultimately lead to the destruction of humanity, and it was called mutually assured destruction. Now that concept was scrapped totally in 2001 in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. It was a complete revamp in the way nuclear war was looked upon by US policymakers. But there was also two other concepts which are very important. First of all, a certain category of nuclear weapons, which are called tactical nuclear weapons, were recategorized in a decision of the US Senate in 2002. These are the so-called mini-nukes, which have an explosive capacity between 1/3 and 6 times a Hiroshima bomb. So we know what a Hiroshima bomb is. 1/3 and 6 times a Hiroshima bomb. These bombs were categorized as having a low explosive capacity, and they were then identified by scientists on contract to the Pentagon as, quote, harmless to the surrounding civilian population because the explosion is underground. I'm quoting textually from the document. Harmless to the surrounding civilian population because the explosion is underground. They were using bunker buster. The delivery method is bunker buster bombs. I can tell you that that notion is totally fabricated. It's a bit like removing the warning on the pack of cigarettes. What it says, these bombs, B6111, B6112, are peacemaking weapons. They are there not to kill people, but to protect people. And so the whole ideology changed, and in the wake of the Senate decision in 2002, they were recategorized as conventional weapons. Okay? Now, what I'd like to emphasize here is that there's a duality in the way you assess the weapons of the United States of America, their nuclear arsenal on the one hand, and the nuclear weapons of other countries, including North Korea. There's an asymmetry. And there's been a lot of endeavor on the part of US policymakers. It's also picked up by the media that ultimately we could go ahead, let's go ahead and use these. And then, of course, the notion of preemptive nuclear war is also a very dangerous concept because it says, let's use nuclear weapons to defend ourselves. Preemptive means really transforming nuclear weapons into an instrument of self-defense. And that, in a sense, is also a diabolical concept. And in other words, this narrative is extremely dangerous. Now, the last notion, now I should say, those small mini nukes can be deployed under the command of a three-star general in the regional command structures. It does not require the approval of Donald Trump, God forbid, okay? No doubt it requires coordination with Strategic Command Headquarters in Nebraska. But what we have to understand is that the whole concepts have been manipulated. And in turn, what is happening is a duality in the way media reports, scientific reports, weapons inspectors analyze US capabilities versus, let's say, North Korean capabilities, okay? Where they're very different level. The United States has something like 7,000 nuclear bombs, half of which are deployed. It has enough nuclear weapons to blow up the planet several times. This is not an exaggeration. And what is now being obfuscated in military documents are the consequences of those of nuclear explosion. Nobody is talking about nuclear winter anymore. We've reviewed extensively the literature on nuclear weapons and its impacts, and literally we're talking about, as I say, the real possibility that this would lead to the destruction of humanity. And we're at a crossroads where errors can take place, where individuals such as Donald Trump don't have the foggiest idea of what a nuclear weapon is. But his scientists are receiving money for giving him the green light, so to speak. So that is the background. Now, there's another concept which is even more dangerous. It's the notion, and it's a US concept, is the notion of a winnable nuclear war. Okay? Mutually assured destruction during the Cold War era, you can't win a nuclear war. Okay? So now they have devised, I won't get into the details, a very complex, from a technological point of view, billions and billions of dollars, of course, of defense expenditure. And that is really what we're looking at. Now, turning my attention to North Korea, we have to understand if we're going to assess North Korea's response, that the United States has threatened North Korea with nuclear weapons for more than 60 years. Even before the onslaught of the Korean War, there were threats of nuclear weapons directed against North Korea. It's an active and permanent state of aggression, certainly since the signing of the armistice. Regular war games directed against North Korea are ongoing for the last more than half a century. And one thing which we forget when we say North Korea is a threat to global security, but North Korea lost a quarter of its population during the US-led war. I quote General Curtis LeMay, over a period of 3 years or so, we killed off what? 20% of the population. We burned down every town in North Korea and South Korea too. Now, if that had happened to California or to Texas, there would certainly be a pretext for the United States saying they're a threat to our security. But in the mindset of North Koreans, there's not a single family in North Korea which hasn't lost a loved one during that war. And it was a deliberate process of destruction. And they knew it, and they were killing people. And in other words, for the United Nations Security Council to come up with this kind of assessment without a recognition of history, without a recognition of the millions of people who were killed in US-led wars, not only in Korea but in Indonesia, which was actually even acknowledged by when the documents were released. The CIA documents were released, and they said, if I recall correctly, they acknowledged that that 250,000 people had been killed as a result of a list of targeted assassinations. In fact, it was much larger. And the only observation that they actually made is to say we prefer the lower number. But they actually acknowledged the lower number of 250,000 people killed. And in other words, what is euphemistically called the post-war era is an era of perpetual warfare. And North Korea is ultimately being threatened for more than half a century. It has lost a quarter of its population. Its cities have been destroyed. His cities have been rebuilt, and are now a model of urbanization. Its whole social services have been rebuilt, and under conditions which are horrendously difficult for this country, a regime of sanctions, of perpetual sanctions, and military presence in South Korea, U.S. military presence in South Korea. Now, I just like to make a small quote because we're in Japan, okay? And I'd like to quote President Harry Truman. And just to give you the cynical nature of U.S. foreign policy, the criminal nature of U.S. foreign policy in relation to Japan, and this is a historical document. And this is in his diary. We have discovered the most terrible bomb in the history of the world. This weapon is to be used against Japan. We will use it so that military objectives and soldiers and sailors are the target and not women and children. Even if the Japs are savages, ruthless, merciless, and fanatic, we as the leader of the world for the common welfare cannot drop this terrible bomb on the old capital or the new. The target will be a purely military one. It seems to be the most terrible thing ever discovered, but it can be made the most useful. President Harry Truman, July 25, 1945. That was a few weeks before Hiroshima. And then when when we recall his famous statement, radio statement, which was made on August 9th, the day the second bomb was launched. And this is the concept that I'd call, this is a concept of what I would call collateral damage, or at least from its outset. The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. That was because we wished in this first attack to avoid, insofar as possible, the killing of civilians, unquote. Everybody knew that Hiroshima was not a military base. And this kind of narrative, historical narrative now is repeated in relation to the Korean Peninsula. I have a couple of other important things to mention. I think I still have 3 minutes. Two. Two? Okay, two. Well, but yeah, you will. You're a generous Italian scholar. You give me.
But it's not for me; it's for the others.
Yeah, of course. Now there are two. South Korea is in a period of political transition, and there are two important initiatives which have to be dealt with. One is the Joint Forces Command, the OPCOM. It has to be annulled. That can be achieved. Why? Because then South Korean forces are no longer under the command of a Pentagon official or Donald Trump, and that means that Korean armed forces cannot be used even to attack a third country such as China or Russia. That's the real, because the Korean Peninsula is a launch pad. The second concept has to do with the armistice. And what I think is absolutely essential is that the Republic of Korea and North Korea get together in the concept of cooperation and sign a peace agreement, a bilateral peace agreement, which will sidetrack the need for a peace agreement under the armistice, and it will be a peace agreement between the two Koreas, North and South, which will then lay the foundations for the demilitarization of the Korean Peninsula. This is a complex issue which we discussed in Seoul in recent days, but those, I think, are the two recommendations that I would make. One, eliminate the OPCOM agreement, which Mrs. Park, who's now in prison, extended up until 2025, and that President Moon can do. And second, negotiations for a peace agreement which is negotiated bilaterally and which is motivated by the fact that systematically the United States of America has refused to enter into peace negotiations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we go next to Professor Kiyul Chung.
Glad to be back to the the correspondent press club. This probably third time sitting here to join you. I will limit my comments on specifically so-called the famous, the 25 years old age, the North Korea nuclear issue. Afterwards, I will term it NKNI, North Korea nuclear issue, NKNI, the 25 years of history. You know, with regard to this NKNI issue, I often think that we live in a world like a caricature, or the fool's show, or the puppet show, the world, led by about 32,000, according to the mainstream media around the world, or the West dominated the mainstream media around the world, often called 32,000 mainstream media. In their views, in their description, in their talk about NKNI is very much, to me, like a fool's show or the puppet show. As Professor Chossudovsky just did share with us about the US nuclear history, the history of US nuclear weapons build-up. That's the real issue the world should look at, should care for. That's the real nuclear issue, which is the US nuclear issue, which is US and I. But all of a sudden, the early 1990s, the NKNI, the North Korean nuclear, has been, we say, manufactured. The issue of North Korea, so-called nuclear issue, has been created. And then the whole world, after the last 25 years, like as I said, it's a fool's show, or the puppet show, or like a caricature, the political caricature. What I'm trying to say, the North Korea, the whole Korean population, in 1950 and 1953 Korean War, the northern part of Korean population, around 9 to 10 million, the 1 out of 3, meaning the 1/3 population was wiped out from the Korean War. As Professor Chossudovsky mentioned, exactly the November of 1950, only less than 6 months of the Korean War started, US threatened the North with their nuclear bombs. Ever since, this small, now 25 million small divided nation has been forced to live with the threats of non-stop nuclear war. And then the world has never challenged the US nuclear issue, which is the real issue, while everybody turn around is showing this puppet show. The North Korea is the provocateur. And they always provoke the world. Or they always threaten the world with their nuclear weapons. What it is. Shouldn't we say it's a puppet show, or the fool's show? The NKNI is not the real issue. The real issue, as everybody, I believe by heart, agree, I hope, that the world has been under the threat from the Washington power with its nuclear, now the Professor Chossudovsky mentioned, preemptive strike. 7 nations were named in 2002 when the Bush Doctrine was declared, that including North Korea, the US has right to preemptively strike on certain sites. And who is calling who is provocateur? I hope the mainstream media, I hope the peace-concerned people question the right question. Instead, the question we've been told to question by the West-led, West-dominated mainstream media, including Japanese media, including South Korean media, not only the Western, the American media. The DPRK has called for the peace treaty signed and end the war finally. Let me finish the brief remark. The president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, on June 2nd this year from the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, something is fundamentally changing in this so-called the manufactured NKNI show. He said, let us agree on a unified understanding of norms, fundamental principles of the international law, and adhere to these rules. Because as long as there are none of these international law, as long as the rule of the strongest, the fist law, is being implemented, we, the world, will encounter that we are now witnessing in North Korea, so-called NKNI. quote from the President Putin. The South Korean political figure, now very important figure in the government, Mr. Song Yong-gil, who was special envoy to Moscow last month by the new President Moon Jae-in of the Democratic Party, the 8th of June, about a few days ago, had a long interview with the Sputnik International. I assume you know about the South Korean division politics. You can never be able to say anything about, quote unquote, supportive of the DPRK, the nuclear posture called the parallel strategy to develop economy at the same time, the nuclear program, in order to defend themselves from the nonstop nuclear threats from the Washington power as a self-defense measure. The Mr. Song Yong-gil from Seoul, in his interview with the Sputnik said, it's not strange that the North Korea, the DPRK, maintains their called parallel strategy, meaning, again, to develop economy and at the same time, the nuclear program solely for the sake of their nation's survival from the nonstop 64 years old nuclear threat from the Washington power. Surprisingly, the ladies and gentlemen, New York Times editorial, the op-ed, the article by former 2 US high officials, Mr. James Dobbins and Jeffrey Honong, said, again, the January 8, 2017, just a few days ago, the title is this. It's not my title or the Professor Chossudovsky or the Kim's title. It says, "End the Korean War, finally." Many key important figures in the US government now do the same thing. There is only solution with regard to the North Korea nuclear issue, only solution to peacefully take care of these. As Professor Chossudovsky said, the war is at a crossroad, very dangerous at the moment, that can be solved by the signing, the peace treaty the DPRK government has called for 60-some years now. US is responsible to sign the peace treaty they promised in 1953, July 27, within next 3 months. They're supposed to sign the paper, but they have never signed the paper. Now, I hope, and everybody hopes, for the peace and security of the Korean Peninsula and the Northeast Asia and around the world, by signing the peace treaty, by removing the US troops from South Korea, according to this the New York Times paper, by removing the US troops from South Korea, and by signing the peace treaty, the North Korean so-called NKNI can be peacefully resolved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before starting the question and answer, Professor Kim Young-Woong.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. My English is very poor. As mentioned, the foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation, approved by President Putin on 30 November 2016, the current priorities of Russian diplomacy in the Asian region are relation with China, India, Mongolia, Japan, North and South Korea. First, China. Second, India. Third, Mongolia. Fourth, Japan. Only fifth, 2 Koreas. But some concept from 2013, 4 years ago. Priority was China, India, North and South Korea, Japan, and Mongolia. This I think change place of Korean problem in priority of Russian policy in Asia connect with some problems of Korean Peninsula. The goals of Russian policy towards the Korean Peninsula are as follows. Russia interested in keeping traditionally friendly relations with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the Republic of Korea, will seek to reduce the level of confrontation and tensions on the Korean Peninsula and achieve reconciliation and development of inter-Korean cooperation through development of political dialogue. Russia has consistently been advocating the denuclearization of Korean Peninsula through the six-party talks. The Russian Federation will continue to make efforts in order to create a mechanism for maintaining peace and security in Northeast Asia, and will also take measures of expand economic cooperation in the region. Russia also considers that in assessing the present stage of development of international relations, the position of two former administration of South Korea does not coincide with those of Russia, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, and non-alignment movement members countries. South Korea has continued to carry out faithfully obligation of the military political alliance with the United States, and its evident example is deployment of THAAD in South Korea, which destroys power balance in the East Asia to force Russia and China to cope with it by strengthening the military force in Far East. Russia believes that security and cooperation in Northeast Asia are closely connected with security and peace on the Korean Peninsula. There can be no peace and security in Northeast Asia without peace and security on the Korean Peninsula, while peace and security on the Korean Peninsula cannot be realized without peace and security in Northeast Asia. Russia believes that the nuclear issue of Korean Peninsula and the military nuclear program of DPRK can be solved only in the context of equal security for all countries, including DPRK, in Northeast Asia. The most important security issues on Korea, Russia believes, is the conclusion of peace treaty between two sides, South Korea and the United States in the one hand, North Korea and China on the other hand, fought in the 1953 Korean War. But it is well known that the US and South Korea do not want peace treaty. Apparently, the United States now is planning war on the Korean Peninsula according with the Operation Plan 5015 and 5027. It is known that the Senator Lindsey Graham influence member of the Senate Committee of Defense, said on 19 April 2017, war will break out in the Korean Peninsula, but not in the US, United States. This means they are willing to sacrifice the lives of Koreans for the sake of United States interests. Apparently, Russia needs to adjust its policy on the Korean issues in general, including issues of the peace and security, demilitarization of Korean Peninsula, and the relation with North and South Koreas in accordance with the changing power balance and the main vectors of foreign policy of these countries, the view on the changing world and the trends. Concerning of Korean issues, Russia needs to play more active role to confront it with the leading not confronted with the leading players in the region, not degrading its diplomatic position and role. President Putin, during meeting with the special envoy, as Professor Chung, Song Yong-gil, told that Russia would intend to increase its engagement of resolving problems of the Korean Peninsula, in particular to send his special envoy to Pyongyang to discuss issues of peace, security, and cooperation on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to all the speakers. Now let's start the Q&A session. I would start as usually with a working press table, although it looks very empty today. But nevertheless, you have the priority, so please raise your hand and come to the microphone and state your name and affiliation if you've got one. Any question? Okay, while you decide, I'll make the first one. Hopefully not the last one. Actually, it's a double question, and probably you can choose who wants to answer. It seems to me that from all your wise judgments, we are closer to peace than to war. At least this is the hope of the world, but also your personal thinking. Could you elaborate a little bit about that? Because as you mentioned before, the puppet show, including the media show, recently has been insisting and stressing the threats of the Democratic Republic of Korea, and the war seems to be near the corner. But actually, it seems to me that you are more hopeful. So would you go as far as to say that within, let's say, 1 year, President Trump is going to meet and sign a peace treaty with North Korea?
Me, you?
Please.
According to official and unofficial reports and information gathering around Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia, the new President Moon Jae-in from South will most likely make his first visit to Pyongyang within his the year of administration, right after his visits to starting this month, at the end of this month, to Washington, as we all know, the Trump and the Moon, the summit meeting. And I assume the President Moon will also make his official visits to surrounding immediate neighbors, such as China, Japan, and Russia. After these major official international summit meetings, many assume the President Moon create a favorable political environment in and out of the Korean Peninsula to attempt to visit Pyongyang to meet the Chairman Kim Jong-un. And having said that, it is not my or some of my colleagues' own prediction. It is many in Washington, D.C. now, more than any other time last 7 years of DPRK-US confrontation, a number of the former and present the Washington, the government talks about, more number of people claim and recommend the government must find an appropriate ways and means to sit with the Chairman Kim and to finalize the Korean War, meaning by signing the peace treaty. So it is not only from Korean Peninsula, but also from Washington, D.C. We hear lately more, as the facilitator, you said, more favorable toward the end of the Korean War, which may come to a final official end, not too far down the road, but in near future. And I'm one of the scholars who said so, that the peace treaty, the peaceful end of the Korean conflict with the U.S. will come it will come sooner than later.
Thank you. In the meantime, somebody has worked out the question. Oh, okay, Professor, go. No, go ahead.
Also, Dr. Kim will say after you.
Okay, go ahead with the second question. I'll intervene later.
Dr. Kim wants to say something about your question.
Okay, please.
And I will, yeah.
북쪽하고 미국하고 그 트럼프 정권하고 어떻게 저 관계 있는 거는 아마 문 대통령께서 미국 방문해서 설명할 거고, 그 다음에 러시아 대통령이 7월 달에 미국 대통령하고 만나면서
I will, Dr. Kim wants to share with you his thoughts on the peace treaty or the peaceful end of the Korean conflict is. 우리말도 크게 얘기해 주시면 됩니다.
그래요. 네.
So I will summarize that
Hamburg,
the World Leaders Summit meeting, G20 Summit meeting in Hamburg, Germany.
그 트럼프 대통령하고 만날 적에
Trump and the President Moon, when they meet, also President Putin in the meeting. Trump, together.
그런데 그때 푸틴 대통령이 미국 대통령께 미 관계만 아니라 북쪽 간한 문제도 얘기합니다.
According to Dr. Kim, the President Putin will not only talk about Russia-U.S. relations, but also the Russia-Korea, the U.S.-Korea relations.
이 얘기하면서 아주 중요한 조건을 지켜야 된다고 말할 것입니다.
The President Putin will put a condition that an important the matter must be kept.
첫째,
number one.
둘째, 조선 반도에서 전쟁이 일어나는 것은 절대 안 되는 것이다.
Second, Korean War must not be allowed, no matter what.
둘째, 모든 문제를 정치적으로 외교적으로 해결해야 된다.
Everything should be resolved peacefully, diplomatically.
그리고 미국에서는 조선이 많이 도발한다고 하는데, 그런데 러시아에서 생각하는 거는 미국 측에서도 남측에서도 조선 관한 도발을 많이 합니다.
The third point the President Putin will mention to President Trump is the world and the Washington accuse the North is provoking or threats the world, but the President Putin, according to Dr. Kim, will say the US and also South Korea provoke the situation or bring the threats to the North.
그렇기 때문에 이런 차원에서 미국이 조선하고는 어떤 방법으로 다자 회담에서나 직접 두 나라의 회담에서 그 문제를 해결해야 되고 그리고 또 평화 조약을 꼭 실행해야 된다.
The employing not only the multilateral talk such as a six-party talk, but also bilateral talk, direct talk between U.S., Washington, and Pyongyang, and then in order to finally end the Korean War, the peace treaty must be signed. That's what the President Putin will directly speak to President Trump when they meet in July in the Hamburg. That's what Dr. Kim's
그리고 또 중요한 것은 뭔가
finally.
하면 저기 설명드릴게요. 국제 동맹이나 기구에서 러시아가 큰 역할을 하는 상하이 코퍼레이션 오거니제이션 그다음에 브릭스에 보면 마지막에 한 5년 동안에 거기서 사미트 있을 적에 나오는 문서 보면 한 번도 북조선 간한 핵무기 문제를 언급한 거 없습니다.
According to the BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the last 5 summits, in any of their official documents, there is no mention of the North Korea nuclear issue. 북핵 문제 얘기한 게 없다고요.
그렇죠. 그러니까
never mentioned on the so-called North Korea nuclear issue.
Okay, Professor Michael wanted to add up something.
Well, I have to present a slightly different viewpoint to what has been expressed. If you look at diplomatic discourse, political discourse, you might be optimistic. Okay, repeal of the op command, possible peace treaty, and so on. But if you examine beneath US foreign policy, military documents, if you address the fact that the United States has initiated a $1 trillion nuclear weapons program, state of the art, if you look at their war scenarios, you don't necessarily get that impression. They continue war preparations on various fronts. Okay, NATO on Russia's doorstep, the Middle East, the Korean Peninsula, the threats against China under the pivot for Asia. In other words, these are not peace scenarios; these are war scenarios, and they are not necessarily part of the diplomatic discourse, which has been addressed. So. And they're part of a hidden agenda. And I can tell you that every single year, at least since the end of the Cold War, they have scenarios of World War III. Okay? When you talk about the Long War, that's a Pentagon project, the Long War. Okay? And then if you look at the PNAC documents, you see that they are committed to waging simultaneous theater wars, etc. Now, just to conclude, this is a touch of humor. This happened 10 years ago. Vigilant Shield war games details sequencing, simulating a war, but it's a global war, with Birmingham, Rubeck, Choria, and Nemesi, which reads, simulating a war with Birmingham, Iran, Rubeck, Russia, Choria, China, Nemesi, North Korea. And there's the road to, it gives you a whole chronology. This particular war game was leaked to the Washington Post by William Arkin, well-known journalist. But they have it every year. They are doing these exercises, Rubeck, etc., and the whole thing ends up with World War III. Now, when you say that they're not planning World War III, they are. Okay? So I have to add a touch of pessimism to the exchange that we had previously. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody who has a question? Oh, come on. No?
Mr. Pio.
Everybody is happy with the situation, no doubts? Good. So I will keep on my debate.
Mr. Pio.
Yes.
May I go back to the Professor Chossudovsky's pessimistic view, which I basically agree with. But at the same time, why? I'm Korean, born in South, and have a U.S. passport, and have a PhD in U.S. and teaching in China, and at Kiyul Chung University in Pyongyang, also teaching in Japan, around the world. Why I'm so optimistic, Professor Chossudovsky? Not only in the 1994 October, the U.S. DPRK U.S. basic agreement signed in Geneva, Switzerland. Not only 2005 September agreement among the six party, the participants, not only the 1999, the famous quote-unquote the Perry report, the William Perry, the former the defense secretary as a special envoy to North Korea, and came back and made a report. The simple core message was that with regard to the North, there is no military solution, no way with the military way to suppress or destroy the North. That's why Madame Madeleine Albright made a visit to North and met the Kim Jong-il, Chairman Kim Jong-il, and even at the end of the Trump administration, planned to visit Pyongyang to meet the Chairman Kim Jong-il, simply because the whole military, the Pentagon planners, came to conclusion there is no way to do whatever they want to do with regard to the North by military means. 2015, January 22nd, the President Obama, is a sitting president, never before, with the YouTube interview before the whole world, said there is no military solution to the North Korea question. And so he talked about, but we will destroy the North from within, so-called the soft power strategy, or the so-called the cultural imperialism, meaning by the Hollywood movies or the violence and sex movies, and then send it to the DPRK and then make the society from within destroyed. So let me stop here. What I'm saying, all the major, the defense and U.S. intelligence former and present key figures came to conclusion. It is not what I claim, it is their claim, including Dr. James Woolsey, the former CIA director. There is no military solution possible with regard to the North Korea's nuclear issue. Only solution, peace treaty, is the only solution for the so-called North Korean nuclear issue. So I just added why I am optimistic is because there is no way to handle the situation in the North. And so the Trump, it is my hunch, it is my hunch, the Trump will, when he meets President Moon Jae-in in Washington, in their only two of their talk, he might encourage, again, I might be crazy, but he might encourage President Moon, I hope you should go ahead to meet the Chairman Kim Jong-un. And you two, the North and South, inter-Korea relations, find the solution. And then that will help my visit to Pyongyang. I might be the crazy guy here, but that's how I hope and how I view.
Okay, so time is almost up. I'm sorry I cannot give any more questions to the floor. There are plenty of hands raised, but sorry, no time. So I will cast the last question, please, because we are in Japan, okay? And until now, I heard the Russian perspective, the Korean perspective, the US perspective, maybe the Italian perspective, but not the Japanese perspective. So is anybody among you distinguished guest that would like to say something about Japan role? You know, this is the country who has the closest relationship with Korea, historically, geographically, and who knows, economically in the next future. The one that could most benefit of a new era. Do you think that in the present Nagata-cho landscape, present politicians in Japan, is there anybody who could possibly, on the surface or under the surface, try to establish a direct talk with Pyongyang, as it happened in the past? I'm sure that everybody knows about Kanemaru and other people in the past. So do you think that now there is somebody in Japan who thinks like Tanaka did in the 70s with China, let us go first. Let us try to do something so that the United States may come up and get angry at us again. I mean, do you think that there is such a possibility? I don't know.
Let me say something very briefly on the issue of nuclear weapons.
Well, sorry,
but it has to do with Japan. Okay? Japan is the only country which was a victim of a nuclear attack. And the historical assessment of that is very, very important. That Japanese public opinion should be sensitized to what a nuclear incident might imply in the Korean Peninsula. Because they have lived through Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And there is a movement in Japan. And there is a position within the government, although maybe they're prepared to forget it. But there's another dimension, is that Japan is also a very firm ally with the Republic of Korea against China and Russia. And the facility located in Jeju Island is a tripartite, well, it's ROK plus Japan, but really on behalf of the United States. So I would expect that given that history and the memory of Hiroshima, that the Japanese would lead us in an understanding of the impacts of nuclear weapons. It's very clear that if there is a use of nuclear weapons against North Korea, it will engulf the entire peninsula for the simple reason, and Americans don't know that, and neither does Trump, is that the distance between Seoul and the border with North Korea is like going from Manhattan to New Jersey, okay? It's a commuter's ride, and it would engulf the entire. So when we talk about U.S. action against North Korea, it is really U.S. action against the entire Korean nation.
Okay, so we have to wrap up. Is anybody
Sure, wrap up, yeah.
could answer my question?
Sure, I will answer, but Dr. Kim first will say a few words. Yeah.
네,
I will
감사합니다.
say after your question. Yeah.
일본 관한 상태에서 제가 좀 설명드리겠습니다.
일본 관계.
예, 일본
He wants
관계.
to talk about Japan, the relations to the North Korea.
일본이 유엔 안보리 선임국으로 그렇죠. 거기 좀 등장하는데 원하는 건데 오랫동안.
Japan has been seeking to have the UNSC, the Security Council, the permanent membership as one of the now 5 members. Japan wants to become the number 6, the power in the within UNSC structure.
근데 그거는 일본이 2차 세계 대전 때 일본이 한 행동하고 일본이 항복했던 거를 인정하지 않으면 절대 일본이 그런 목적을 실행할 수 없습니다.
Unless Japanese government officially recognize and admit the war crimes the former empire committed before the Second World War, and unless Japanese do the things they compensate or do the right thing as a war crime, the war criminal nation, the Japan will never be able to have a seat in the UNSC structure.
어제 일본 그 국방장관이 그 도쿄 국제 재판 그 결과를 그 잘못됐다고 말하는 거였는데 그 뜻은 뭔가 하면 일본이 2차 세계 대전을 조직하고 시작한 국가 중에서 무조건 항복한 나라입니다. 세계적으로
Japan was one of the nations who had the immediate surrender, the total surrender to the Allied countries at the end of the World War II.
세계 2차 세계 대전의 두 나라밖에
Only two nations, the Germany and Japan.
항복한 나라가 없습니다. 그거는 독일하고 일본이고 그리고 두 나라 지도자들이나 군사 죄 있는 사람들이 재판한 거는 독일하고 일본밖에 없습니다.
The top leadership of the two nations, which is the Japan and the Germany, were tried at the Nuremberg trial. Only two nations, yeah.
네, 그러니까 지금 일본 정부에서 어제 국방장관 말한 걸 보면 일본이 그거를 점점 거절하고 나가는 겁니다.
It seems as according to yesterday's the 관방장관, the defense minister of Japan, seemed to negate the military trial at the end of the World War II, trying to negate what happened in 1945. That seems the Japanese trying to run away from that real past history.
그거를 일본이 중국이나 러시아나 다른 2차 세계 대전 때 일본 침략을 당했던 국가들은 그런 일본 행동을 지지할 수 없습니다. 동의할 수 없어요.
So that he believes that Russia and China and the UNSC, the permanent members, will not agree to what the Japanese, the government, the president, the stance on what happened in 1945 at the end of the World War II. And then your question about the Japan, allow me to speak this before the Japanese press people. Like South Korea, the Japan, in my judgment, has never been independent from Washington power. The Japan has never been able to play its own independent role with regard to the peace and security of the Northeast Asia, particularly with the Korean Peninsula issues. But to your point, whether the Japanese government is ready to join something favorable for peaceful end of the Korean Peninsula, that's your question. I hope so. I hope so. Some people say Abe government under the table is ready to rush to Pyongyang if and when the Washington begins to move to that direction. I don't know if that's the true or not, but that's what I am hearing here and there.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think this is going to end this press conference. Thank you for our guests, and thank you for attending. And bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.